The stage is set. Nichiren, having halted the retinue of warriors and onlookers so he could dismount his horse ride to his death and address Hachiman and the sun goddess themselves, the very core of cultural Japan, certainly the warrior class as well in Hachiman, and announce that they were betraying the future of the entire nation, in fact, the world, by allowing him, the one man in Japan who staunchly supported the correct transmission of Shakyamuni's teachings, the correct practice of Buddhism, not defiled by politics and ego and what have you, that was very obviously destroying the very essence of the people in his nation and by extension the world. Remounts his horse. Everyone's kind of confused, jaw dropped. Of course, a lot of those samurai he's converted to his way of thinking about Shakyamuni's teachings of the Lotus Sutra, yeah? In fact, the guy holding the bridle of the horse leading him to his death is none other than his good friend Shijo Kingo, who is probably quite conflicted as he's following the directions of Heino Simon, his lord, doing what he's told, but not quite sure the implications. Nichiren's back on his horse and they start heading toward Tatsu-no-kuchi, right? The site of his beheading. Our author continues. It was some time past midnight when Nichiren arrived at Tatsu-no-kuchi. Everything was ready for his execution. Soldiers surrounded the place. The official witness, Heino Simon, was sitting in a chair. Finally, we're going to put this pest to rest. The executioner standing behind him. Nichiren sat down on a straw mat, joined his hands in reverence, uttered the sacred title Myoho Renge as he'd invoked when he started this journey. Well, he started his journey quite young, but certainly as he started his particular doctrine of the Lotus Sutra, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Okay, I'm ready. And stretching out his neck, awaited the stroke of the sword. See, unlike in the West, where we put people in guillotines to behead them, in the East, they sat in a dignified position, and from behind them, the swoosh of a katana, or whatever implement they used, would behead them. Suddenly, and quite to everyone's surprise, I won't use that word, as he himself and others witnessed, the sky was ablaze with light. It was after midnight, right? Dark. And suddenly, this light, quote, something bright, like a ball of fire, flew from the southeast to the northwest, and everyone's face was clearly visible in this light. There are some astronomical predictions, cosmologists, astronomers, who suggest that this would have been a large meteor. Something that we've seen in recent history over parts of Russia and other places in the world, where this great fireball, like a comet, but a meteor, large enough to not have broken up completely in the atmosphere, but as it's gone through the atmosphere, just burned up in this large ball of fire, right? It's not unusual. Well, it's unusual as being witnessed by people, but what a strange timing, yeah? A remarkable timing, anyway. The executioner became dizzy, and he fell. Soldiers were panic-stricken. Something ominous is happening, something, right? Because the air of following orders and deep, abiding respect for this messenger of teachings, this man, this imbued, enlightened man, it bore a spiritual, an emotional conflict in everyone. So to have this happen lent a lot of mystery to the event, yeah? It certainly made them consider multiple times, what are we doing? So to continue with our author, soldiers were panic-stricken, some running away, others prostrate, even on horseback, right? When we prostrate ourselves, we bow and we, in deep respect and homage, or you know, sometimes fear, but out of a deep respect, right? We just, everything was in confusion, and the execution was no longer possible. This just disorder and people going, no. With that, just as he's about to be beheaded, no, something's wrong here. We're not doing this, right? Right there in front of Heno-sama. This narrow escape, more unexpected and incredible than in any preceding cases, this has never happened before, left its impression on Nichiren also. So deeply that he regarded his life thereafter as a second life, right? He was ready to die. He uttered his last daimoku, his last commitment of respect to the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha in the Lotus Sutra. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Okay, full circle. I'm ready. And suddenly this thing happens. It's an amazing physiological, astronomical event. Everybody is shattered. Run away. He's not killed. And he's sitting there thinking, I'm not dead. What would you think? Surely, with that last daimoku, invoking my life for Myoho Renge Kyo, had some significance. How could you not think that? And more earthly, I remember when I went in for my first neck surgery in 1999, I did not believe I was going to survive that surgery. I really didn't. For months ahead of the surgery, weeks ahead of the surgery, I spoke to a counselor. I said, I'm ready to go. I've lived a full life. I understand. Mentally, I was preparing myself for completion. And when I awoke in ICU without pain, and my bed in the ICU overlooked windows onto the Pacific Ocean, I mean, it's a storybook. And I just laughed to myself. I thought, on the one hand, I thought, I'm alive. On the other hand, I thought, what in the hell do I do now? I finished. I'm not saying I'm Nichiren or anything like him. I'm just saying this is a perception, an event I can relate to. So, of course, Nichiren, as the writer attests, regarded his life thereafter as a second life. Absolutely. The life after, well, what the word he uses is a resurrection. I don't think I would use that word. But certainly a renewed commitment to really live one's life with intention. Intentionally directing my life, rather than sort of have fallen into a path like one is often to do, right? Childhood, teenage years, young adult. We're forming ourselves, and we often don't make a real decision about who we think we are until we're in our 30s or even later, right? But here we are with an instant rebirth. Well, now I can start my new life with an intention. Certainly, Nichiren must have felt this. In a later writing, he expressed this thought as follows, quote, "A man called Nichiren was beheaded at Tatsu-no-kuchi a little after midnight on the 12th day of the 9th month of last year. His soul, his presence, his identity remained and came here to the island of Sado. Bodily Nichiren wrote this in the midst of snow in the 2nd month of the year following, and it leaves it to posterity." Another letter, written in 1277 to his beloved warrior disciple Kingo, who was there, shows how gravely he regarded the crisis. Quote, "Over and over I recall to mind that you came following me when I was going to be beheaded, and that you cried and wept holding the bridle of my horse. How can I forget that as long as I may live? If you should fall into the hells because of your grave sins accumulated in the past, karma, I would not follow the call of my Lord Shakya, whosoever he might invite me, or howsoever he might invite me to Buddhahood, but I would surely be in the hell where you are. If I failed in my commitment to the Lotus Sutra, to Shakyamuni's teachings, to my great master, my guider in practice, then if you go to hell, so surely would I, because we're of one mind." Yeah? I'll continue the quote. "If I and you are in the hells, Shakya Buddha and the scripture will surely be there together with us. This entire teaching of Buddhism and the Lotus Sutra would join us in hell if somehow we've been misled or done this incorrectly. We're of the same mind and the same commitment. Myoho Renge Kyo, yeah? Another letter addressed to the same warrior, Kingo, written while the crisis was still fresh in his memory, says, quote, "Tatsu-no-kuchi is the place where Nichiren renounced his life. The place is therefore comparable to a paradise, because all that has taken place for the sake of the Lotus of Truth. Indeed, every place where Nichiren encounters perils is Buddha's land. Surely when I shall be on Vulture Peak, I shall inform our Lord of your fidelity shown in your readiness to follow me to death." I've read in accounts where the closest retinue of somebody who was sentenced to death was often also killed as just an honorable, dignified death of a subject to master kind of a relationship. I don't know how true that is, but I think that that's a reference to it. The authorities were perplexed what to do. You can imagine. When the day dawned, it was decided that the prisoner should be sent to Echi, or Eki, depending on how you pronounce it, a village 15 miles inland from Tatsu-no-kuchi. When at noon he arrived there, he was received very reverently into the mansion of the local chief, and the soldiers of the guard began to listen to what the wonderful man said and preached. Meanwhile, it seems, the government circle were much disturbed by the failure of the execution. What do you mean he's still alive? But there was this guy. Shut up! Right? They're like, what the hell? We can't kill this man. And a faction among the officials seems to have raised its voice against those who had urged that Nichiren should be put to death. Look, don't be so hasty. I mean, all these men can't be liars. This must have happened. Maybe we should back off. This was the situation in Japan entirely, but it was playing out within this drama of these officials sick and tired of hearing this pest questioning their authority, and at the same time authorities who were mollified a bit by Nichiren's stand. He wasn't just some regular upstart. He had a point to make, and it was quite eloquent. And yeah, I think when you're following a bunch of malarkey and you know it's politically and egotistically motivated, when somebody pokes at it, you're kind of willing to understand that maybe he's more right than wrong. Yeah. Late in the following night, a special messenger came from Kamakura. A decision was made, ordering that good care be taken of the prisoner. Finally, he was sentenced to exile again, but this time we're going to send him out to that. Nearly a month later, they sent him out, and he left Echi for the island of Sado. And he'll freeze or starve to death out there, and then that'll settle the matter. That was designated his place of banishment. And so now we move to the exile at Sado and the ripening of Nichiren's resolve in his mission. Chapter 6. Yeah, Nichiren's very life was instrumental in bolstering his mission, his sense of mission, his understanding that now with his new life, he could do no other than be completely committed, not only in attitude, but intent, which he had before, but it was based on a developing life. Now, with this event, it was like he graduated or been tested through the crucible of truth, that now there was nothing else for him to do or live for than to proselytize, to propagate, to correct practice of Shakyamuni's teachings, specifically with the teaching of the Lotus, of self-enlightenment. No one else is going to do it for you. No one can give it to you. This is already in you. You just need to wake up to it. And Nichiren adopts the Lotus Sutra as Buddha's his own self-enlightenment, telling his students, anyone who would listen, you can do this for yourself. Do it. Enlightenment is not some far-off afterlife or any of that magic, that mystical baloney. It's right here and now. This is the Buddha land. All it takes is your mind. So, with that, we begin. 10 days were spent in the journey from southern coast of Japan to the northern, and Nichiren now stood on the exposed coast of Echigo, gazing upon the waves raging in the winter gale. On the way thither, he had traveled over hills and passes, crossed streams and valleys never before trodden by him. This is all foreign experience to him. Now, in the midst of winter, the lands all along the northern coast were covered with snow. There he saw for the first time the Sea of Japan. This man who hitherto had known only the Pacific Ocean. The gale raged so constantly that he was obliged to stop at the little haven of Teradomari for a week. You remember Teradamari, we have Gosho writings from that stop that we've read in previous podcasts, yeah? All of his past life seemed to him something like a series of frightful dreams, yet the dreams were real as any facts of human life. Nay, more real than anything else, because the records had been written in his tears and blood. During his stay there, while waiting to embark, he pondered over the past and future, quote, mountains beyond mountains, end quote, he had found in his journey in coming here, and waves upon waves, quote unquote, were raging in the sea before him. Was this another crucible for him to pass? Another challenge of his life as the messenger of Shakyamuni? Similar had been his past experience, and such was also the prospect of the coming years. He examined and reviewed all the history of his life, comparing it with the words of the texts, the teachings, and could only arrive at the same conclusion he had come to in Izu, but now upon more conclusive evidence. He was the prediction of Shakyamuni in the text itself of a lone monk, a man who had to come about, who had to instantiate in this time of Mappo, to raise his voice in the face of the loss of the teachings and reestablish Shakyamuni's doctrine of self-enlightenment. It had to be him. Look at all the evidence of his life. At first seemed anecdotal, but after Tatsu-no-kuchi, how could it fail to be so? Right? Reasoning this in his mind. Although every step of his perilous life had been a subject of reflection in the light of the prophecies in the texts, Nichiren had never before had an opportunity so well suited to a comprehensive retrospect and profound meditation as at this time. As he reviewed it, his career had step by step fulfilled almost to the letter the prophecies of the prophecies concerning the propagators of the truth, the bodhisattvas of the earth, you and I, and certainly saw himself as the propagator, the one of the four guiding bodhisattvas, yeah? And now he was entering a new life. After a rebirth, the proper part of his life as the man completely dedicated to the cause of the truth, as well as to the spiritual welfare of all the people in the coming days of degeneration. Quote, the pioneer who lives the life of the lotus of truth, end quote, was surely not a product of chance, but a realization of the vows and promises recorded in the text itself. Then why should not he, Nichiren, be in vital continuity with some of those bodhisattvas who had been commissioned by Buddha to work in the future, bodhisattvas of the earth, and were destined to suffer persecutions on that account? You're going to encounter all sorts of resistance. You're going to be re-enlivening the truth of the teaching in the face of a lot of corruption. Many persons are mentioned who appeared in the assembly of the Lotus and took the vows to perpetuate the truth, right? The whole story of the Lotus Sutra. The ceremony in the sky, some call it, yeah. Whoever they might be, Nichiren must be one of them. This was the conviction that was now firmly established in his mind. This is stated in a letter addressed to one of his earliest believers, Lord Toki Jonin, remember? Written one day after his arrival at Terra Domari. This letter is the first of a series of testimonies evincing Nichiren's consciousness that he was an embodiment of one of the bodhisattvas in the prophecies. After a brief narrative of the journey, the letter quotes the passages to which Nichiren had paid special attention, interpreting the meaning of his life. The quotations are similar, but in this letter, a special emphasis is laid on a passage in the 13th chapter on perseverance, such as, quote, "They will deride us and abuse us and assail us with weapons and sticks," end quote. Quote, "We shall repeatedly be driven out of our abodes," he continues. Nichiren has indeed been driven out repeatedly and exiled twice. The Lotus of Truth proclaims the truths which are universal to all ages, past, present, and future. What it says concerning the past is to be true of the present, and what announces to occur in the present will be fulfilled again in the future. Thus, the chapter on the Bodhisattva, this Indian name he keeps using, but we know it as Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva Perseverance. I can't think, there's so many different titles. Sariputta. I wonder if he has a translation here. No, thank you. Thus, the chapter on this Bodhisattva, telling what happened to him in the past, is now being realized in the life of one who is practicing what the chapter on perseverance tells, and vice versa. Then surely the man who is now realizing the perseverance will be in the future the man who practices the life of Sariputta. Thus Nichiren will be the Bodhisattva Sariputta. The chapter on perseverance says that in the future, in the days of the latter law, there will appear 8 billions of millions of bodhisattvas who practice their vows. You see, he's identifying with their leader, our leader. Now, in these days, there are the 3 kinds of opponents of the truth as exemplified in Nichiren's persecutors. And yet, if not one of those millions of bodhisattvas should appear, it would be something as if an ebb were not followed by a flood, and as if the moon, when it had waned, did not wax again. When the water is clear, the moonlight is reflected in it. When a tree grows, birds abide in its branches. Nichiren is the vicar of those bodhisattvas, the leader of those bodhisattvas, 8 billions of millions in number, and is protected by them all. So, he took on the mantle of the story of the great leader of the bodhisattvas, as told in the Lotus Sutra, that somebody had to come forth, and obviously it must be him. Look at all the evidence. The leader of the innumerable bodhisattvas who took the vows of perseverance was the Bodhisattva Sariputta. Nichiren is not here quite as definite as he was in a letter addressed to the same Lord more than a month later from Sado. In the letter, he says in part, "During nearly 2 months since my arrival in this island of Sado, icy winds have been constantly blowing, and though the snowfall is sometimes intermittent, the sunlight is never seen. My body is penetrated by the cold, whereof, as is told concerning the cold hells, there are 8 kinds. As I have written you, during the 2,200 years since Buddha's death, various masters have appeared in the world and labored to perpetuate the truth, knowing its import and yet adapting it to the needs of the times. The great masters Tendai and Dengyo made explicit the purport of the truth by uttering its sacred title. and yet they did not propagate it. One who shall fulfill this task is to appear in this country. If so, may not Nichiren be the man? The truth has appeared, and the omens are already more clearly manifest than ever before. The text says, quote, there appeared 4 leaders, Visistakaritra, etc., the 4 great bodhisattvas, who are on that mandala, I will remind you. Not just by Nichiren's signature, but symbolized in the original names given by Shakyamuni of these 4 leaders. Yes? Remember, the shack he lived in was not even battens. We have board and batten construction we talk about now. We're just talking boards. It was a shack. You could see right between the boards to that icy cold winter. It wasn't much of a protection. This is the first definite statement about his personal connection with Bodhisattva Jogyo. The leader of the Bodhisattvas called out of the earth in the chapter on the apparition of the heavenly shrine, or the apparition of the golden stupa, sometimes it's called, but the treasure tower. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. From this time on, Nichiren remained constant in the belief that his former life was that of one of these bodhisattvas, although he often referred to other bodhisattvas as his predecessors and spoke as if he were an embodiment of one of them. See, he never made the mistake of, as this author is, calling himself a reincarnation. That's a Hindu mysticism. He's not a reincarnation, just as you and I aren't a reincarnation of previous bodhisattvas or anything. Right? We can embody the karmic mission, energies, tendencies, and conditions of previous personages, but we are not them. We are enacting. We are embodiments. We are actively coalescing those energies into our moment-to-moment existence, which is our practice of Nichiren's doctrine of self-enlightenment as prescribed by Shakyamuni Buddha in the Lotus Sutra. It's a mouthful, but that's what we're doing. The place where Nichiren was abandoned was a hut in a cemetery, little sheltered from the wind and snow. No regular supply of food reached him. He was clad only in coarse hempen robes. It was a wonder how he survived these severities. He, quote, felt in his body the 8 kinds of icy cold, end quote. Yet there was a fire in his inner heart. He almost starved, but he was provided with the comforts of his conviction. Yet he would have died of cold and hunger if a zealous adversary, who at first attempted to kill him, had not been, contrary to his intention, converted by Nichiren's teachings, doctrines of the Lotus Sutra. The man was a warrior who had come to him in attendance on the ex-emperor, who had been banished to the island more than 50 years before. Remember, the shogunate took over from a long history of imbued leaders, the emperor. And this emperor had been banished to Sado as well. But the emperor had the benefit of a retinue of people to support him. Nichiren had none of that. And one of that retinue, a samurai, as I said earlier, oftentimes a persecution of especially an important person, was a persecution to his entire retinue. So you kind of have to be careful who you commit your allegiances to, yeah. Anyway, this samurai, who was living in exile along with this ex-emperor, went to look upon Nichiren. The emperor was probably curious. Go find out what he's about. Yeah. Again, good subject for a movie. And the more the samurai listened to what Nichiren had to say, the more he was convinced that Nichiren was an important figure, that he actually was, not unlike his emperor, castigated and sent out in exile because he had merit, and that the current corrupt government couldn't stand having him around. This, I'm sure, made a lot of sense to the samurai. So going out there very skeptical and ready to just finish the job, as it were, he listened. He continued to live there, and he was a devout Amida Buddhist. This samurai had been trained in Nembutsu, yeah? The honest but simple-minded man, having heard of Nichiren's antagonism to Amida Buddha, determined to kill the devil monk, because for personal reasons, he knew the legend of Nichiren. He'd heard about it. He knew why he was exiled. Interesting how word travels. And he himself, and I don't like that he said simple-minded. I think what that means is just, education, what we call education, wasn't available to everybody in those days, in medieval times. That was a special, you had to be of a certain class or caste to qualify to learn reading and writing and access to, right? Whereas a monk is a very educated person. If only by virtue of the libraries which we've read about that Nichiren's gone to in these different areas, yeah, and learned, self-taught. So he approached the samurai, the solitary hut, and watched for an opportunity to stab the hated man, but was involuntarily attracted by Nichiren's voice as he recited the Lotus Sutra, Gongyo, and finally entered into religious discussion with him because he thought it's not proper for a Buddhist and a warrior to kill another without giving him a warning and attempting to convert him. I hear what he's saying. I hear him reciting. He's a Buddhist like me, but he's not practicing right. Let me go in and straighten him out. Start chanting Amida Buddha. Why are you not doing that? Well, he invited an answer, didn't he? The man, no match in learning and piety for Nichiren, was converted by him whom he had formerly hated. Damn, you make a lot of sense. Wow, you understand this far better than I ever did. You have made several salient points. Maybe I've been doing it wrong all this time. Nichiren converted him, not least of which with his compassion, I'm sure. His wife followed the example of her husband, and it was they who supplied Nichiren with food. Wow, what a turn of events, yeah? They remained faithful to him until death, and, as in the case of the fisherman and his wife in Izu, the prophet never forgot to be grateful to them. We've read that in the Go Show, yeah? Several tender letters were written to them later are testimonies to the close relation established between the master and his converts. Hatred and persecution on the one hand, but consolation and protection, both amazing and human, on the other. All work to strengthen Nichiren's gratitude toward the teaching, the scripture, the sutra, and his resolve in his mission as the messenger of Shakyamuni Buddha, or of Buddha, of Buddha-ness. Yes? In this way, the severest of the winter season passed. Several communications were meanwhile received from Nichiren's followers on the mainland. By the time the snow and frost began to melt and the sun was pouring down its warm rays, the exile was no longer solitary and deserted, but had about him a few converts and was preparing to continue his work. The work to be done was, of course, of quite a different sort from that which he had done in the combating others. The 50 years before the Tatsu-no-kuchi persecution were introductory to the proper part of his mission. There in Sado, he was to arrive at the climax of his life, the revelation of profound truth of his doctrine, his understanding, his propagation of. This idea was a necessary consequence of Nichiren's belief that his own life was an embodiment of the Lotus of Truth. Because the sutra was always divided by interpreters into three parts, the introduction, the climax, and the consummation and perpetuation, Nichiren conceived of his own mission in conformity with this division. And the task to be done in the climax of his life, now begun, was to reveal the essence of his doctrine, which in the event proved to be the revelation of Buddha-ness in a symbolic representation of the universe. All right. We will continue in the next. I hope you found or are enjoying Mr. Anisaki's writing, be it over a century old, on the account of Nichiren's life and his own personal transformation, Nichiren's transformations, in his understanding of his practice, which we should all take to heart, not only for ourselves, but those we introduce to this practice. There is always these stages, first of amazement and validation, then maybe some shying away and questioning, and it's important that answers be available at that point. That's why I'm doing this. That's why there's a bookstore and a website and these free videos. The podcast can be downloaded. Different avenues of support, like, subscribe, to address that inevitable question. Man, this is working. Now I have real questions. Yeah? We all do this. Nichiren's life, no different. Until we get to that point where we have a crisis. And in that crisis, we have to redouble our commitment. We have to, as I've said before, take your mandala, your practice, your Gohonzon portal to Buddha-ness, and challenge it. Damn it, I need this crisis answered. And rely on your practice to do just that. When that moment occurs, for everyone it's different. Sometimes it's early on, sometimes it's much later. But once that happens, then there's no turning back. Then you absolutely know. Buddha-ness is real. Buddha-ness is now. Buddha-ness is life itself. And without it, I'm just a tumbleweed, waiting for things to happen and respond and react to. No, I want to drive my life, this life. And with this practice, this is the mindset. This is what we learn and train ourselves to do, to stay aware that it is we who drive this life of value, dignity, wonder, amazement, fully. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening along. Let me know what you think of this book. We're about halfway through it. But we're learning a lot, not only about Nichiren, but the way of practice, of Bodhisattva practice, yes? Thanks again. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of your health. Be kind to yourself. And I'll see you again. Bye for now. Myo.